Another one in the series of Does It Pass the Pub Test?
Yeah, you were asking me the other day if I think that there's life in outer space. Well, I know there's certainly life in your spa.
Hang on, since when? Is it possible that the government is not telling us everything?
Well, how much would you want to know? I mean, as you know, there are no ends in administration or government, only loose ones. How much do you want to know? Do you think there's some science out there that we're not aware of? I really don't know. I look at it from this way. We really didn't think there was anything smaller than what we could see with the human eye until a couple of 100 years ago. Once the chap invented the microscope and was appalled to see actually what there was under the lens, we really changed our mind about what's possible. When we actually got to see extremophiles, that's creatures living around volcanoes or living in hot vents under the sea, that can actually exist with temperatures which are way beyond the conditions we could survive in.
And the acidity.
And the gases as
That's
well.
Right, yeah.
And it really made us reframe our understanding of what's possible for life.
Or even the forms of life that are out there.
Yeah, for sure. Because we think, really, as ourselves, we think that everything alive has to be something which we've seen before with the eye, or is similar to us. It breathes, it takes in oxygen, it relies on blood, it's carbon-based. But life could probably be a lot more than just that. Let's say if we stripped away the mandate that life had to be something which was, let's say, carbon-based. Now, we know that silicon can be integrated into something which is carbon-based, but is it possible that we end up with the rock monsters, the rock-eating monsters like we had in Star Trek, or a creature which is actually silicon-based? At the moment, everything that we talk about is speculative. We've never seen life outside of Earth.
Well, hang on, that's not what they tell us out of Area 51.
So who are you listening to there in Area 51?
No, I mean, there is so much that I believe the government is withholding.
Now, I've actually, just for entertainment purposes, read quite a few books in a series of the Millennial Hosts, where we have a chap who was basically worked on the range, and he was a meteorological supervisor in the US Army.
Mm-hmm.
And his job was to go in to check the stations and record the weather.
Yep.
And the chap who he was piggybacking and doing the job with, showing him the ropes, became increasingly scared as he got closer and closer to these particular stations. It was such a state of panic that he just wouldn't go there himself. Now, the chap who wrote these books, he alleges that, well, in fact, this was a government cover-up, and in fact, we were hosting the whites.
Yep, that's right.
The aliens which you'd see, which you'd expect to be tall, almost the Scandinavian types. The problem is with those books that he wrote at the start, he really said that this was a fiction, but as it became more popular and he started to do the circuits, it changed to be fact. Now, very entertaining reads. Very, very entertaining indeed, because you're dealing with the idea of the fear of something different to you. I mean, truly, what could be more xenophobic than a true xenos, something which is actually a stranger from outside of this earth?
Okay, so are you of the premise then that there isn't really, let's specify,
Yes.
intelligent life that has perhaps visited us in the past?
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit more. So Fermi was famous for asking a group of friends, if there are aliens, well, where are they? Where is everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And so a chap who was heavily involved with sending signals out to space, his name was Drake. The equation was named after him. Let's go through the Drake equation. We start through the most simplified premises right to the most extreme, and then have how many people do we think, how many civilizations do we think are intelligent? And it'd be a matter of this times that times this times that.
Mm-hmm.
You start off with things like the number of planets, which they are. Now, when I was a child, there had never been one planet observed outside of our solar system.
Correct.
And the argument always then was, if we could but see one planet outside of our solar system, the chance for life existing outside of Earth would just be infinitely higher.
Yes.
That event's already occurred. In terms of life, the distinction which we have to make in this conversation is between intelligent life and just simply life. Now, in the Drake equation, intelligent life, it goes up to that highest level of difficulty, which is being able to transmit interplanetary signals. So let's just take that as intelligent life, okay?
Okay.
So
yep.
even if we've got a simian like an ape on a tree, if they haven't developed that level of technology, just to make this really simple, let's just say that's not intelligent.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Okay.
really,
We'll use that as a base.
There's a problem with that because if you're living in an aquatic environment, for example, a dolphin, they'll never be in a position where they can actually transmit to other planets. They're just surrounded by the medium of water. It conducts electricity. They develop differently, so they'll never have thumbs. They're just not in a position biologically to be able to do that. So
Okay.
it's a crude definition. Now, do I believe that there have never been intelligent beings that have visited us? One thing that always shocks me a bit is when I think about the book Ezekiel in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't seen it, just Google it. Have a look at some of the pictures and the descriptions of a heavenly revelation. It's hard to know what state of mind the writer was in when he wrote this, but certainly it's something very odd and it's very different to what we categorise as an everyday experience. I don't think that we have anything factual or anything which we can say has been knowledge derived from a civilization outside of ours. But I have to remember one thing, and this was a science fiction book which I read a long time ago, where effectively the technology which was handed down from the aliens to us was the craft came down to basically buzz us, have a good time and see how technologically backwards we were.
Mm-hmm.
But the landing platform of the gear left a rivet in the soil, and in that soil the water from the rains actually flooded it, and the civilization living there got the idea of irrigation. You could argue that something as simple as that could be a transfer of technology. But in terms of something which is a legacy which I can say categorically this has happened, I don't think it passes a pub test at this moment.
Okay. Let's think about the archaeological discoveries in the South Americas
Mm-hmm.
and in many other places around the world,
Yeah.
let's face it.
Yeah.
Well, we have these structures. I mean, we
Sure.
know everybody knows about the pyramids and all that type of thing, and there's still speculation of how the fuck did they possibly build that. And there is many arguments. They say, oh yeah, but they had, hundreds of thousands of people, labours,
Work camps have been identified there.
Yeah.
Together with details of what they're actually paid in terms of wages and beer.
Oh, well, I like it already.
Yeah. And let's not forget that things like pyramids, which equally transfers from Egypt to South America, is basically a failed skyscraper. So if you can't build a skyscraper, that means that you can't build something which is self-supporting. If it's not self-supporting, it will have to collapse in of itself. If you engineer the collapse of it into itself, it changes from being something which is a rectangle, basically to a pyramid in shape. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily indicate a huge level of technology. It means that you've not got the next level of technology to build something which is in fact freestanding.
Okay, let's accept that as an argument. What about these other structures that have been built where stones of hundreds, if not thousands of tons have been, individual stones of that weight have been built and carved somehow to fit together in such a precise manner as you can't even put a piece of paper in between the stones, and yet they were supposed to have moved these, not only carved them, but moved them into position in such a way to be such a tight fit. And engineers today claim that they cannot, with today's technology, be able to do that feat today.
I would argue that today that mankind can't build one beautiful building. So that's a technology lost really in just the last 30 years. I think, let's say 40 years, that's happened. First off, there's a number of fallacies, I think, in what you're saying. You simply can't go to absurdum and say, we're not aware of how this can be done, therefore aliens. That's sort of a bit ludicrous. In terms of transport, water is really one of the major ways, rivers, that use transport. It's a reason why the economy of US developed so quickly. In fact, you had the waterways there as the cheapest and the easiest means of moving things, and the same for moving stones. In terms of if you cut something, it doesn't mean you're cutting it at the source precisely the way it's got to fit. You fit it then, you cut it then to make the fit to the gap you're putting it into. Now, I agree, not all the technology is there. Some people would argue Temple of Solomon sort of technology, stuff which is handed down by maybe Hiram Habib, who knows. I wouldn't take that logical leap, though, that this is something which has been handed down by aliens. I mean, the understanding of geometry is something which the Greeks had, and it even preceded the Greek understanding as well of geometry.
So if it's not aliens, are you saying that we have had civilizations here with superior technological knowledge that have been lost in time due to, I don't know, volcanoes, earth, tectonic, plate shifts or whatever, have disappeared into,
Interesting question. It's also part of the premise of the Drake equation that a society which is capable of transmitting messages has to exist for a period of time. That means that even though you may have had many, many civilizations on Earth, it's the longevity of them which will get them to the next technology grade. Now, also part of the Drake equation is talking about, I guess, that zone where we get to where we have a proclivity for warfare, for climate change, or nuclear power to wipe ourselves out. Now, I don't see any evidence of anything but an absolute proclivity to warfare. Read through ancient texts, which are still codified today. Read through the Old Testament. For example, you'll see that we have a habit of hurting ourselves, or like that line from Terminator 2, when the kid's looking at the Terminator and he says, "We ain't going to make it, are we?" And the Terminator says, "It is in your nature to destroy yourselves." I think that's very much the case. A couple of years ago, I was at the first European civilization, which was on the island of Crete, which was the Minoans. To some extent, you could say it was a transference of technology and culture, maybe from Egypt. You can see Egypt basically from there. It's that close, just across the Lebanese Sea, the Libyan Sea. And you can see they have a lot in common with what a lot of the ancient civilizations have. You've got to have an area where you can cultivate, and you've got to have an area where you can retrieve fresh water, and you've got to somehow develop a thing like an aqueduct to run the water across for that to work. Now, that civilization became extinct. We're still trying to work out why. Some people say it was because of warfare, and some people say it was because of climate change, actually because of volcano in the area. And if you're lucky enough to ever mix shoulders with the rich and go to Santorini, you'll see the whole caldera, which is close by, which some people say was the reason for that civilization falling. So we have a proclivity for civilizations to fall and to fail. To say that any of them have had a technology level greater than what I described as something like that, or to Rome, or to ancient Greece,
I mean,
I don't see that.
I'm referring to what a lot of people, mythology, belief, that, like, for example, the lost city of Atlantis, who was supposedly had these, incredible technologies that were lost when they supposedly sunk under the sea, although now there is debate as to whether it did sink under the sea and it's actually somewhere else actually on the planet.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion as to where in fact it would be and how isolated it would be if it was actually way off into the ocean, or in fact it was just a city or an island off, let's say, Greece or somewhere in the Mediterranean. It's something which I was always very quick to dismiss as a child until I realised that actually Plato did make mention of it. It's pause for thought. I don't know if there was ever any understanding of them having a greater level of technology, though, than the other countries around them. And see, the thing to remember about all of human civilizations is that an empire will crumble when it shuts its borders, because what happens at that stage is there's no technology transference.
Yes.
So let's have a look at two countries today where there basically are closed borders. Largely, Cuba and North Korea, there's very little technology transference from there. They become impoverished, they don't build up, they actually close. That means that if you have got a neighbour who's more technologically advanced, they will be transferring their technology, they will be trading it as well. That's sort of the only example is probably the US Air Force with the greatest of their fighter planes, which they still refuse to give Australia. We got stuck with the F-35s instead of the F-22s. Looking out into space, though, a lot of the moons that people are exploring, things like Europa, here's an interesting fact. Do you know that all of our planets are named in Latin? And all of our moons are named in Greek?
Is that right?
Yeah,
oh, no,
that's
I
interesting.
never knew that. There you
So
go.
look at something like Europa, which is basically water-based, and they imagine that if there's water, there's a greater chance of life. I guess that's something which we're used to ourselves. We'd expect where there's water, there's life.
As in similar life form to ourselves, because our life form specifically requires that water.
Ours do, but also if you've got water, you've got oxygen there
Yep.
as well. And again, we sort of think that there's got to be oxygen present, which even planet Earth has proven to us that doesn't have to be the case. If we were to discover life, I think the chances are it wouldn't be what we're calling for this argument intelligent life, something that's capable of transmitting signals interplanetary. It would be something probably in the oceans of one of the moons of our planet, for example. Now, here's the thing that's going to trip you up.
Huh?
Do I believe that there's alien life? I think it's almost certain that there is alien life. And the reason I say that is it's quite likely, in fact, that we are the alien life that we're talking about. So the concept of panspermia, spermia, seeds, pan, everywhere, seeds everywhere. That if there is life, the life will be launched through volcanic activity, through meteorites, through comets, and it actually will find its way to the other reaches of the universe. So the chances of our genesis being actually here on Earth, I think, is probably pretty slim.
Okay, so let me
That spun you a little bit, didn't it?
Yeah, so let me get this straight. You're still of the opinion that because we haven't come across them as yet,
Yeah.
that you're not of the belief that there is other intelligent life. Let's focus on the whites,
Okay. Yeah.
all right? That there is no similar
So the
to
whites
the
are different.
whites.
The whites are different to the greys. So most people who talk about aliens think about the small greys. Roughly 4 foot, very large,
Yep.
liquid pool black eyes.
But in
with
any
no
event,
emotion.
they're intelligent life forms that have travelled here. This is what they're saying. Okay?
Okay.
So you're saying that that is all complete hogwash?
I'm saying it's unproven, so it's not something which we can assert.
No, of course we can't assert. This is why it's called a pup test.
Yeah.
What we're saying is, are you dismissing the possibility that they have that? Well, some people claim they are here. The government says, of course they're not. Don't be silly. You don't believe there's a possibility that there is aliens that have visited us, or for that matter, are here now from somewhere else out in the galaxy? Intelligent life that have had the technology to travel here.
It's an interesting thing how you actually guarded what you just said. You limited it by saying within the galaxy, because of course our galaxy is one of only
Oh, of course it is. But
billions, and suddenly if you open up past this galaxy, well, the theoretical possibility it just increases 1 billion times.
of course it does.
Infold
But I'm
as well.
talking about the time frame it would need to travel from one end of the galaxy to the other, to make it half reasonably real.
Yeah.
If you're talking further away galaxies, you're talking about a life.
So in fact, it's not a problem for the traveller, it's the people at either end, the people who've launched and the people who are receiving them.
Okay.
That's where the problem is. And it's going back to really to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they're talking about getting speeds up so you can meaningfully travel between galaxies. And they decided that the limiting factor was always the speed of light, until they discovered that the one thing that actually travels faster is bad news. So they filled up their ships with bad news, and sure enough, they overtook all of the fighters which were sent millennia before, travelling at light speed. But the problem is that they weren't received at port because nobody likes bad news. No, I think that speed of light is really something which limits the contact which we'll have outside of the galaxy. And I think that unless we can actually categorically point to some proof, I think it's just conjecture.
Unless you believe the conspiracy theorists.
Well, where do you start and where do you stop? And really, what's too extreme to believe then if you go down that path?
But then there's the other argument, isn't there? How arrogant would we have to be to believe that we are the only intelligent life form capable, or on the verge, if you like, on the verge of being capable of transmitting, travelling into space?
And still being around at this particular stage. which is one of the big ones too.
But how far have we come in 50 years, in 100 years? You know, and with the speed of computer power increasing exponentially, won't be far away.
Anything but exponentially. If you look at Bayes' law, essentially they're talking about an increase, a doubling of computer power every couple of years. In fact, that's certainly reduced dramatically lately. We're sort of getting to the theoretical limits as to how something non-quantum can travel on a silicon chip.
But now they're on the verge of quantum computing, aren't they?
Yeah, I'd say they're on the verge for sure. I mean, there's already been some successful trials.
There you go. So we're past the silicon chip already.
Yes and no. Yes and no. It makes some calculations a lot more possible and a lot quicker, but it doesn't really replace the standard operations of a computer. I guess it's a slightly different thing, but you're talking about the technological leaps which we're going through at the moment.
That's right.
Yeah.
And only in the very short space of time that we have done that. So again, back to the original concept of the question. How arrogant would we have to be to believe that we are the only intelligent life form capable of transmitting and travel in space? How arrogant would we have to be?
I'd say that we're not capable of travel in space at all.
Okay.
So what's the furthest effectively that we've been? It's to the moon.
Well,
so at the moment we've got near Earth orbit space station. We have sent the Vikings out past the solar system, but that's really not even a dint. So to say how arrogant that we are the only ones, we haven't even achieved that ourselves.
And does that mean that there is no beings out there that are way past that point?
It's funny, I've read some quasi-philosophical religious work which says that it's by design that we are so isolated by distance and time so that no harm can come to us. Whether that's true or not, let's just take the points that we are so isolated by time and by distance that no damage can come to us, and that means that to believe that something has actually projected itself and come out here which is alive, I find that really hard to believe. Let's talk about a different form of technology like von Neumann machines at the moment. Now there's a great science fiction series called the Bobbyverse. I'm 5 books into it. I think a 6th book is coming out soon, and it's about a chap who was he was a tech magnate, died at an early age that replaced his body and his brain, and he became part of the neural network, and he started to be a general of his own space navy, and he designed these ships which were self-replicating, which would go into space, mine a planet, create more creatures like itself, and launch them out. But effectively, all of this knowledge would be artificial intelligence,
yes,
and all of these beings would be non-biological. So I think if there's a case for visit, it would be from a dead society which is sent many generations later. An AI-powered version of that von Neumann machine would come to visit. Probably something that we'd regard as a god, sort of like that Star Trek film where the alien meets V'Ger.
Oh, yes,
which
yes,
is actually Voyager.
Yes.
So imagine something like that with the von Neumann machines going out many generations from now. The other thing to understand, which we still know it really closer to, is how life actually generated on Earth. I mean, there's been no record of abiogenesis, that's life just spontaneously generating, or even in a lab being generated. I know that things like the proteins have been created, and people are talking about early RNA technology and things like that, but we still haven't come there to explain that. I mean, that's a very unique, or some would say divine spark.
Okay, let's look at the counter-argument. What would happen if we were, in fact, visited by a superior race?
Yeah.
Visited.
Mm-hmm.
They came, take us to meet your leader. You know, that sort of thing. How? I mean, we're only talking about human history and human knowledge here. But if we were to transfer that, let's say, onto these aliens that have come to visit,
mm-hmm,
things wouldn't end well for us, would they?
Look, it's a very interesting thing. The problem we've got is that most of our thoughts and deliberations today are recorded through the internet. And so basically our motivations and our fears and our weaknesses are all there. And we've just recently done a video of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. So our enemy would understand how to attack us at our weak points. And it would be the weak points only they'd be looking for. They'd be looking for the fact that humans are so divisive that even things like, we all originally come from Africa, but even the way that we identify now as being different from each other would be a point of contention. The fact that we have no form of stable government. Election is basically a buy-in of the popular vote.
Yep.
Country by country. The fact that we live still on one planet only, and we haven't managed, like Elon Musk wants to protect humanity by introducing it to other terroirs.
That's right.
To other lands. So we would be absolutely up the creek with the paddle. Now, recently, only a couple of weeks ago, I've bought an unofficial sequel to War of the Worlds. You remember in the first War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells, there was a bit of science fiction work going on at that period. So his work wasn't 100% unique, but it was certainly on the crest of that movement of feelings at that time. People had started to train their eyes to telescopes, and they'd seen what they believed were canals, irrigated canals on the surface of Mars. So the idea that Martians could launch themselves here was something which was conceivable. And in fact, when it was done as a dramatised radio show, people thought that's in fact what happened. Some people spent their life saving to get as far away as they possibly can, believing it was true. In the first one, they caught a wallop from humanity because we had disease, which basically killed them.
Yep.
But in fan fiction, and also there was an official sequel written by another person, they come back, and they come back pretty quickly. So I think it would end very badly for us. Any civilization which has got the power to transport themselves that distance and that time would be uniquely capable. And was it Arthur C. Clarke who said that any society with a very high level of technology that is indistinguishable itself from magic? And that's effectively how we'd see it. And what that would mean is that it would reframe the way that we look at religion. It would reinterpret the way that we look at certain books of the Bible, for sure. Our creation stories, for example, particularly the book of Genesis. You know, who are the others which are mentioned in the Old Testament? What was Ezekiel seeing? And so it would cause a lot of fear. It would probably also cause a lot of immediate unity as well. But it would also cause an undeniable doubt in the governments which are controlling us because, like you're suggesting, there must be some information which has not been shared with us, some knowledge and some diplomacy which has failed. So it would show that there's been an absolute failure of diplomacy. There's been withholding of information from the people, and we'd really go through that existential crisis of, when I say existential, first, our soul searching, our testing our own myths, our division against each other and against the government, I think followed by, depending on how much time we had,
this is it,
a unity together.
Because if we look back on our history, it didn't end well for the people who we visited that were, you know, shall we say, more primitive.
Yeah, look, there was a book awarded the Pulitzer Prize that I invested in called Guns, Germs, Ammo and Steel by a chap called Jared Diamond. And he tried to answer the question when he was asked in Papua New Guinea why the rich white folk had so much cargo. You might have heard of the cargo cults, where during the Second World War, some of the areas around New Guinea were basically airdrop supplies. And I thought, this is great, the gods are providing supplies to us. So they actually started to build replicas of basically airstrips and hangars, and just waiting for the gods to replenish them again. It's kind of neat, really. He came down to the idea that technology is driven to a large extent by the temperature that you can fuel. So that's based on what sort of metals and coals and things like that you have. If you've got the ability to smelt and you've got the iron ore, or let's say bronze, tins, etc., you can start to smelt very high temperatures. You can start to win war, and you can start to win. I'm reading a book at the moment by a Greek economist, and he's basically started off with a reference again to the book. I don't agree with his take, because I think to a large extent it's not based on technology, it's based on trade. which is predicated upon the culture of the people. So, for example, the Australian Aboriginals in the north of Australia were not limited to the technology of Australia, because they were dealing with the Melanesians, and they were dealing with people who had higher level of technology for the watercraft than what they had.
Yes.
But they didn't assimilate and take that technology on. So let's just take away completely this argument, which I'm hearing all the time, that they couldn't smelt their ovens to a particular temperature. Technology transference doesn't have to come from that. And I think diplomacy is founded upon culture, as is government and organisation. So I think there's some part of the argument that's missing there.
Well, I don't know how much further to take this, but what do you think? Because I'm sort of got like a foot in each camp here. Do you believe that there's aliens out there? Do you believe that we've been visited?
Are they under your bed? Perhaps.
And if so, are they taking pictures? Because there's been a lot of anal probing happening from what we hear from people that supposedly have been abducted. But anyway...
Some of it voluntary.
Yeah. What camp are you in? Do you think there's aliens out there visiting? Do you think they've already visited? Do you think the government's got a couple of them, you know, in the back room there somewhere, and they're having a bit of the, you know, sharing information that they're not telling us? I don't know. What do you think? Does it pass the pup test? Are there aliens? Are they here? Or is it all a bit fishy? I don't know.
You know where I stand?
There's more on the way, guys, so give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.